for coming. We're so happy to have him here giving his presentation about Durand Eastman Park. You might be familiar with his 2 books that he's written, one on Mendon Ponds and the most recent is on Durand. So I'm going to turn it over to him for his talk. We also, though, I guess I should mention, have some hikes coming up that he'll be leading at Mendon Ponds Park. So more information will be announced about those shortly, but the first one's going to be on May 1st. So we'll have those coming up as well. So I will hand it over to you. I'll flip off the lights.
Okay.
And we'll get started.
So welcome and thank you everybody for attending this morning. Most of today's presentation is going to be on the Durand Eastman Park book, but I thought I would give a little bit of an update on the Mendon Ponds Park book. So if you haven't read the Mendon Ponds Park book, I'm not really giving anything away, but it's a little bit of an update. So first of all, in terms of my background, I spent most of my career in medical diagnostics and primarily in women's health. So I helped launch 2 first of their kind FDA cleared products here in the United States. One was the first DNA-based test for human papillomavirus, which is the cause of cervical cancer. And then after that, I helped launch the first FDA cleared device that could identify a common comorbidity of breast cancer treatment, which is called lymphedema. I retired from the medical device world and medical diagnostic world about 13 years ago and started my own little family run business, which I'm still doing today in my part-time. And then in 2021, I started the Fairchild Walking Tours, which is essentially what Liz mentioned. I'll be doing both Fairchild Walking Tours of Mendon Ponds Park throughout the year, and those are sponsored essentially through the town of Pittsford Rec Department. But Liz and I thought it might be interesting to offer it for clients and her customers here. So the first one is May 1st, and then I think we have dates in the end of June, and then early September and early October. And then in 2023, I co-authored the book on Mendon Ponds Park with Diane Ham, and I think the next slide gets into that a little bit. And then last year, I authored a book by myself on Durand Eastman Park, and we'll definitely get into that. My first typo is that I've been married 43 years now. I still have 2 children that I know of, and three grandchildren. So this is Diane Ham, who's my co-author on the Mendon Ponds Park book. She's been the town of Mendon historian now for 46 years now. So Diane, I would, as I was preparing to give walking tours of Mendon Ponds Park, I would occasionally call up Diane and say, "Hey Diane, why is this way in the park, or why is that, here?" Because I would notice odd things around the park. And actually, the first walking tour I'll be giving here with Liz is going to encompass many of those questions that I had as I wander and run around the park. And so she would help me find solutions and answers for a number of these things. And then in April, actually, of 2023, she called me up and said, I know everything about the people that used to live in Mendon Ponds Park before it was a park, and you seem to know all about the geology and invasive species and all of that stuff. She said, "Why don't we get together and write a book?" So I said, "Well, all right." I'd had other people take my walking tours, ask if, said, "You should write a book about this." That ain't going to happen. But Diane had written other books about the town of Mendon. And so she had the experience, and together we worked pretty intensely. And in October of 2023, we published the Mendon Ponds Park book here. And Diane has been a real wealth of information, a friend and a colleague, and she really understands. Whoop. Yep, excuse me. That is not the way to be. don't know if this is gonna. Well, that's good, but well, I think for the sake of time, I am going to. We're just going to kind of skip ahead here. And I'll just cover kind of verbally here what I was going to cover in the about the Mendon Ponds Park book. Since I wrote the Mendon Ponds Park book, there's been a number of realizations that I've had. And so I was just going to update you on some of those. The park itself is only there because of Professor Herman Leroy Fairchild. He was the professor of geology at the University of Rochester from 1880 to 1920. It was Professor Fairchild who recognized how unique that 5 square mile area was because of its geographical features of glacial recession, kettles, cames, and eskers. Within a 5 square mile area of the park there, you have 2 different eskers, you got numerous kettles, and all the sledding hills are really cames. So I won't get into what each one of those are. It's all covered in the book and everything. But the park itself was commemorated on June 30th of 1928. So it's got a 100-year anniversary coming up in 3 years. But I was always astounded as we were writing this book that there was nothing in the park ever named after Fairchild. There's not a shelter, there's not a cabin, there's not a trail, there's not a road, nothing. It's like he was unknown. And it's not because people didn't like him. As a matter of fact, all of his colleagues said what a fantastic person he was, his students, other scientists that he worked with, etc. So it was just one of those things that just never came together, unfortunately. So I had the realization that Fairchild spoke at the dedication of Mendon Ponds Park on June 30th of 1928. He and a number of other scientists and some politicians naturally jumped into it. But he was 78 years old at that point. And I think that at 78 years old, he probably didn't care, first of all, whether or not anything was named after him in the park. His goal was to get it set aside as a park for Monroe County because of its unique features. And so it also makes sense that at the time it was first dedicated, it was formerly farmland. So it was all pretty clear cut. You didn't have the nice treed areas and the pines and all of that, you know, the deciduous woods and hardwood forests that we have there now. And there certainly weren't any shelters to be named after him. There weren't any cabins to be named after him. There weren't even any trails that were named at that point. So, so I don't think he had any expectation in 1928 that anything should be named after him. For him, it was mission accomplished that he, you know, got that area turned into a park. But I thought, well, there's kind of an injustice there, really. The man responsible for the park being there doesn't have anything named after him. So if you're familiar with the park at all, there's 2 quarries in the park. They're actually not in the park. They're contiguous to the park, just outside of it. One is was Clover Sand and Gravel, which is right by where Canfield Road and Clover Street runs north and south in there. You have the old quarry in there. The other one is over on South Wilmarth. But the sand and gravel quarry right there by say off of Clover Street had they stopped mining it for sand and gravel back in 1993. And they basically let the water fill back into the normal water table. And it's now, I guess you could consider it either a very large pond or a relatively small lake. So I did a little bit of research with the United States Geological Survey people, the USGS in Washington, D.C. And I was curious because it doesn't have a name, that body of water. It's 11.4 acres, but it doesn't have a name. Spall, the developer, owns all the land around it. So I called up Spall's office and spoke with his daughter, Stacy, I think her name is. I said, how do what do you guys call that body of water there? And she said, well, we don't call it anything. It's the we just call it the quarry lake or something. So, So I read up a little bit more on at the USGS site, and then I went to Bill Smith, the supervisor of the town of Pittsford. I said, "Hey, Bill, I think we have a really, really unique opportunity here. How many people in their lifetime get to name a body of water, right?" And so I explained to him how I thought it would be really cool if we named that lake Lake Fairchild. And he thought that was a great idea. So I presented on March 19th to the town of Pittsford board, and the town attorney had already contacted the USGS in Washington, D.C. I submitted an application at the end of June, which was incredibly simple. Actually, you submit an application to the USGS if you've got something you want to name, if you got a mountain in your backyard or a woods or a pond or a lake or a river, anything geographical you want to name, you can. And I thought it was going to be incredibly complex to do. It wasn't. It was simple. It was nothing like an IRS 1040 link, which is what I was expecting. So I submitted this application and basically wants to know, well, where is this thing? What is it? Why do you want to name it what you want to name it? And then you submit the application, which I did. They review it, and then as a final step, they make sure that Native Americans don't have any objection, to your naming something or changing the name of something. And then in October of this last year, got a letter from the USGS saying that now that Quarry Lake is officially now Lake Fairchild, which is pretty cool. So Fairchild finally has something named there. And I was just over at the park office earlier this week. And the park supervisor there, his name is Scott. And Scott said, "Come on out here to the garage." And I went out to their garage, and he had 3 signs made up that say Lake Fairchild. And they're now posted there. So in a couple of different areas. So that's what I was going to give you as an update. That if you go to like the Quarry Meadows Trail, which is right off of Canfield Road by the kiosk at the bottom of the hill there when you first turn off of Clover, you'll now see a small sign up there that says Quarry Meadow is the trail and Lake Fairchild. And so, and I bring that up also because, as you'll see, there's a lot of kind of odd similarities between these 2 parks that I've written books about. And it wasn't necessarily planned that way, but it's kind of worked out that way. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So on to the Durand Eastman Park book. And we'll have a Q&A session if you'd like, rather than asking any questions while we're here. We'll do a Q&A at the end of the presentation, if it's all right. So Durand Eastman Park, these are the 2 gentlemen who are responsible for it. And I did not plan on writing a book about Durand Eastman Park. I'm formerly from Irondequoit, and so I just wanted to know, well, everybody knows who Eastman is. Who's this Durand guy? And the more people I asked, the more I found out nobody knows who Durand was. Some people thought it was George Eastman's first name, which is a little naive, but that's all right. So I began looking into Durand and his life and found it so fascinating. All of a sudden was getting so much information coming at me because I was visiting the George Eastman Museum and working with their archivist there, John Ellsbury, who was incredibly helpful, got fantastic information from there. And I worked with the city historian, Christine Rodarski, and a number of other primary sources, people that knew him, people that know the park, etc. I finally had so much information coming at me, I started to write it down just so I could remember it all. And eventually I was like, well, I guess I'm writing a book. So that's what happened. In this photograph, actually, only one of them is a photograph. The one of George Eastman there on the right was taken in Paris when he was 39 years old. George Eastman was born in 1854. And he was very driven by business. Obviously, he brought photography to the globe. And his family came from Waterville, which is just east and south of Syracuse, kind of south of Herkimer, if you will. And so a family of very modest means. And the rest of his life was very much driven by business. On the left-hand side here, you have a portrait, a painting of Dr. Henry Strong Durand. This was from a copy that I obtained from the art museum at Yale University. And a little bit more on that in a second, but it's not a photograph, although it kind of looks like one. And oddly enough, there are no photographs that I'm aware of these two gentlemen together, which is kind of shocking because, in fact, there's a photograph I have in the book of George Eastman, who took a photograph of Henry Durand's summer home up on Lake Ontario, but there's no photograph of the two of them together. So this is the Durand Eastman Park book is very much a book divided, if you will. To get a sense of the George Eastman and Henry Durand, I was looking into each of their lives and decided it would make sense to just kind of to get my head around it, to create a timeline, which I did from the year 1854, every 5 years. And what was George Eastman doing? And during that period, what was Henry Durand doing? So I could see at each point during their life, what each was up to and when the park was formed and, things of that sort. So that's really the first half of the book, if you will. And then the second half of the book is really about the park itself and what I call the 6 pillars of the park. This is an interesting, I was saying to some folks here to begin with, there were some early black and white photographs by Albert Stone, who used to be a photographer for the Democrat and Chronicle way back in the 30s. And much of his work is available at the Rundell Library now. Some of it is, a limited amount of it is available only, or it's owned, I guess, by the Rochester Museum and Science Center. But this is, I thought, a very interesting photograph. I don't think they had drones back then, but somehow Albert Stone, yeah, man, must have climbed on an airplane. But this is the old beach house that used to be there. This is Durand Lake, you see here. All that's left of this building, this must have been like a concession stand, and all that's left of it there is linoleum tile. So yeah, so when you're coming around off of Sweet Fern, off of Culver Road, you come down, and eventually when you get to a point where you can see the lake here, there's a little pull-off area there, and you can actually see the floor of where this building used to be. And then this is the famous White Lady Castle back when it actually stood. All right. Right now, there's only a stone wall there, and there's all this folklore about the White Lady ghost who, haunts the park at night with her dogs, looking for a lost child and all that. Well, this building actually used to be the refectory, which was a communal restaurant, essentially, because people would come in down to the park from the city, and they had no shelter, and sometimes they had very little or no food. So the refectory was built for shelter and for food, and unfortunately, it ended up burning to the ground. But so the second half of the book is all about what I call the 6 pillars of the park here, and we'll get into those a little bit more towards the end. Then I had the very good fortune in the Mendon Ponds Park book, because my house backs up into Mendon Ponds Park, and I have run in Mendon Ponds Park for the last 30 or 40 years. So I know Mendon Ponds Park like the back of my hand, and I've got photographs, coming out of my cell phone like crazy. But with Durand Eastman Park, I didn't have that advantage, because even though I was brought up in Irondequoit and Durand Eastman Park was just down the road from me, I didn't frequent it enough in recent years to have the spectacular photography that I really wanted. So I reached out to 3 photographers, all of whom contributed their work. David Liakina, David shoots mainly birds, and he's got just incredible selection of photographs of birds. And Jim Montanus and John Greach. So these 3 really helped, I think, make the photography in the Durand Eastman Park book really spectacular. Come on. So here's an example of John Greach's work. John's an aerial photographer, so all of his photographs are taken from about 1,000 feet from his private plane. And Jim Montanus is pretty well known in the Rochester area for his pretty spectacular landscape photography. So it made a great combination because David's work is mostly of animals and primarily birds that he focuses in on. Jim's are mostly landscapes and John's are all aerials. So they're quite different, but quite complementary for a book like this. So, George Eastman, that's not him. That is his mother, however, Maria Kilbourne Eastman. And George's father died when he was just 8 years old. And George had older sisters, and I think a younger sister, but he really immediately kind of took up the mantle of providing care for his family, beginning work at a very early age, and dearly loved his mother, Maria Kilbourne Eastman. Eastman essentially developed some of the original work that laid the groundwork for Eastman Kodak Company. He developed it in his mother's kitchen, really. He had this intense interest in photography, the very earliest days of photography. And he developed a dry plate machine, essentially working with gelatins in his mother's kitchen there over in Waterville. He never married, but wherever he traveled around the world, Eastman was in touch with his mother, regardless of where he was. He kept her always in her own place. And he always, made sure that she was being taken care of if he was out of town. So,
we're going to credit. We'll calculate actual shipping. When it got to our owner, so she was going to calculate actual and then credit.
This is a photograph that I hadn't seen before, but John Ellsbury had it at the George Eastman Museum. And needless to say that George Eastman at Mendenponds Park. This is an early map of Irondequoit. It's called a 1974 Beers map. And I showed this just because it's kind of interesting to see before there was a park, where some things were. I guess that's not going to be a good area for me to stand over here, but the Durand Eastman Park essentially ended up in this area. And if you, it's not super sharp, but you can see a number of the roads here that formed the early park. Culver Road was not called Culver Road, it was called Woodsman Road back then. And the park itself ended up being formed simply because of the efforts of Henry Durand. So who was Henry Durand? Well, it was Dr. Henry Durand, actually. He was the sixth member of his family to attend Yale University, so the Durands were fairly well off. Any Yale grads in the crowd here? All right. Well, he was voted the class poet. He actually wrote the words for the Yale alma mater that any Yale grad would know and be able to stand up and sing for you if any of you were Yale grads. I'm not either, but quite well known, or the alma mater is really quite well known. So he graduates from Yale in 1881, takes 5 months off, and goes to Europe. Now, this is a theme that runs through his life. He's very much into adventure, right? He's fairly well off. He's got a great sense of humor, in my opinion. He's actually a very kind man, as I'll get into in a little bit here. I would say he was a real mensch. He was just a really good person at heart from everything I could determine from my research. But he loved adventure. Not that that's bad. It actually made his life quite different than George Eastman's. George was completely business oriented to bring photography to the world. Durand was not necessarily that way. So He, after coming back from Europe, 5 months in Europe, he attends Harvard Medical School, graduates with a degree in surgery, and he moves back to his beloved Rochester to set up a practice. He wasn't born here originally. He was born in Ohio. So in spite of the fact that his middle name is Strong, there's no association that I've been able to find between Henry Strong Durand and the Strong family in the Rochester area here. And it's not his mother's maiden name or anything. That was Stewart, and his mother's maiden name is in the name of, for example, his older brother. But I haven't yet figured out where this Strong came from. But I don't think it's the same Strong as the Rochester Strong family. So Durand moves back here to Rochester to set up his medical practice at 87 South Fitzhugh Street, which I went to visit, and I found myself in the middle of the Civic Center parking garage. So that was slightly disappointing. They put in Route 490 right there and knocked down a whole bunch of the homes, which were beautiful homes, on South Fitzhugh off of Broad Street over into the Cornhill area. And unfortunately, 87 South Fitzhugh is no longer. But that's where he set up his medical practice. And in 1898, he bought 270 acres of land up on Lake Ontario because he had always wanted a summer camp up on the lake. And he builds a house, a barn. He plants 83 trees in an apple orchard. And he convinces George Eastman to buy all the land around his so that they could jointly then give that land to the city of Rochester for a park for the people. Okay, so this is one of those similarities. If it weren't for Henry Durand, there wouldn't be a Durand Eastman Park. Just like if it weren't for Henry or for Fairchild, there wouldn't have been a Mendon Ponds Park. In 1907, Durand and Eastman deed their land over to the city. It was almost 500 acres, 484 acres of land that they turned over to the city of Rochester for a park for the people. Again, as I said, a lot of people would come down, would end up coming down to the park out of the city of Rochester, but they didn't otherwise have access to Lake Ontario before that because it was either all privately owned, or it was farmland. So there was no really good access. So it was Durand's idea. He wanted a park for the people, not for organizations, not for companies, not for groups. He wanted a park for the people of the city of Rochester. But they give over, he and Eastman, they give over that 484 acres of land in 1907, but Durand keeps 20 acres of land for lifetime personal use. Seems fair enough. Keeps 20 acres, gives almost 500 along with George Eastman to the city. By the way, this photograph I have here, most of the book, an awful lot of the book is based upon 2 volumes here, which are, I had the special order in from Yale. It's the Yale History of the Class of 1881. And it's in 2 volumes. The first volume, they both were intended to be biographical or autobiographical. The first volume, Henry Durand wrote specifically about himself, and it was kind of a shorter section about what his interest was when he attended Yale, and if he participated in any sports teams, and who his favorite professors were, and that kind of information. The second volume was published at a later time, but unfortunately it was right after Durand had passed away already. So his wife, Harriet, ended up writing up the rest about what did you do with the rest of your life? How did your Yale education help you? And what experiences did you have, etc. So his life is really summed up extremely well between those 2 volumes. But what I'm holding there are one set of only 3 in the United States that they're aware of. So extremely rare, and they didn't have any requirements for white gloves, which surprised me, but I was very careful with them. So this is the 1902, called the Hopkins Plat Map. And as you can see here, Henry Durand owns all of this acreage. And George Eastman ends up buying the mango farm here. He ends up buying the Lop farms here and another farm over in this area. And so this is really the whole area that ends up making up Durand Eastman Park. And I'll call your attention to one parcel right here, which is owned by Catherine Saralee. It's a 10-acre parcel. And we'll come back to that because that turns out to be a very interesting parcel of land just after Durand's death. Anybody from Irondequoit here? Okay, you're probably familiar with the Huntington Hills area then. This is Alistair Huntington owned all of this land. Durand had arranged options for the city to own all of that land for $100 an acre, and the city turned it down. And instead, they sold it off for $1,000 an acre. And there's a number of developments down there, as you know now. But again, just keep in mind this Saralee property right here. So Durand meets this guy by the name of Albert Stillwell at the Genesee Valley Club. And not a lot of information available on who Stillwell was exactly, but he tells Henry Durand about the riches and the adventure to be had in Mexico mining gold and silver. And as I said, Durand's really into adventure, so he thinks, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. So he closes up his medical practice and in 1908 decides he's going to depart for Mexico to mine gold and silver. And he has this verbal agreement with the city of Rochester before he leaves that they're going to watch his stuff. He's got a house up on the lake. He's got his apple orchard there. He built a barn. He's got caretakers living in a log cabin up there. He even tells the city, you can rent out my house to reputable parties and you can keep the revenue, but just watch my stuff while I'm away. All right. Seems like a fair enough deal. I know all the attorneys in the room are going, oh, you never do that. All right. Well, as we find out. So he arranges before he gets down to Uruguay, Mexico, right here. This is the Mexican-Texan border, as you can see. So he probably came by train down from Rochester to somewhere in Texas, and then probably by horseback to here. But Uruguay, Mexico is just this tiny, tiny little village. And it's at the base of a 3,000-foot mountain down there, and they have to go in by mule for the last 30 miles of it. Prior to his arrival, he had already arranged for a home and a housekeeper in Uruguay. So he arrives down there, and the next morning he wakes up at the house in Uruguay, and he's got 23 patients lined up around his house. So even though he had kind of given up on his Hippocratic oath, he had to take it up again. The reason all the patients were there was because surely whoever owned the house and the housekeeper said, there's a doctor from America coming down here to little tiny Uruguay, Mexico. The nearest physician lived 250 miles away. So Durand becomes not only physician, he becomes obstetrician, he becomes veterinarian, he becomes all things medical for the people of Uruguay. He also recognizes that it's really it's desolate and the people have really no health care at all. So he arranges and orders medicines, don't tell RFK, vaccines, bandages, all sorts of things from the United States, which he has shipped down there on his nickel, on his tab. So it didn't cost anybody. It was free health care while Durand was down there. And so obviously he becomes dearly beloved by the people of Uruguay, Mexico. And the Santa Claus is a reference to his first year down there. He arranged to have some men go up into the mountains and bring down a pine tree. And he somehow manages to like hide it somewhere in the village there. And he decorates with white cotton balls and some gauze and things like that. So, 2 days or 3 days before Christmas, he has gifts arrive for all of the children from the United States. And so it was really their first Christmas in the way that Durand knew Christmas, which is really, I think, a phenomenal story. And again, that was written by his wife, Harriet in the second volume of the History of Yale, 1881.
Did she go with him?
She was already down there. Harriet lived in Mexico. She was originally from Boston, but she was down in Mexico the whole time that he was down there. And it wasn't until actually after 1915 that they actually got married. And I think I get into that a little bit. But as you can tell, he was really loved by the community for obvious reasons. So he comes back to Rochester in 1915 and to tell his family and his friends he has some business interests to look after and everything. And he returns to find that the city of Rochester has taken over his 20 acres of land for lifetime personal use. Wow. Shocking. I mean, he was like, what? You know, I gave you guys my stuff to watch, not to. So they had cut down his apple orchard that he had planted by hand. They tore down his barn, removed a metal fence that was there, evicted his housekeepers, and tore down the old log cabin that was on his property. And the reason they did this, as you will see, is because the person who ran the Monroe County Parks Department at that point was Alexander Lamberton. Ooh, ouch. Yeah. And Lamberton had decided that Durand's 20 acres of land for lifetime personal use was the best place to put a zoo. We already had the Seneca Park Zoo in Rochester, and so Rochesterians were saying, hey, time out a second, why does a city the size of Rochester need 2 zoos? And Lamberton kind of stood back and said, well, no, we're going to keep Seneca Park Zoo, but we're going to create a zoo in Durand Eastman Park just for hoofed animals. And he ended up buying all the hoofed animals himself for that zoo. This is this map you see here is from a later letter that Henry Durand wrote to the Rochester city mayor, Clarence Van Zandt, back in the day. This was back in the 1916 to 22. He actually wrote the letter to Van Zandt in 1922, a very detailed letter about how he come back to Rochester, the whole thing with George Eastman, acquiring the land, giving it to the city, use my house, all that stuff. And this was the 5th page of his letter. And as you can see, it even, the map here is the 5th page, and it says, Dr. Durand, lifetime use. This is the 20 acres of land that he had kept. That land is now on what we call today Zoo Road. It wasn't called Zoo Road back then. So that was in 2015. In 2016, Durand had his trust officer at Security Trust Company, a guy by the name of William Stackle. He had him try to formalize with the city of Rochester that informal agreement that he thought he had with the city about his land, his property, the buildings, all of that stuff. And so Stackle wrote Lamberton and trying to formalize that verbal agreement. And he got this letter back from Alexander Lamberton saying, I hereby advise you the Department of Parks and the City of Rochester does hereby assume control of the homestead of Dr. Henry Durand. I had a really hard time with this. I had trouble sleeping.
After how generous he was.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, and so I called up. She was Christine Radarski was then the City of Rochester historian, and she's now the Monroe County historian. But I asked Christine. I said, I got to meet with you for lunch. This is really upsetting. I'm a Rochesterian, I was born and bred here and everything, and this is just so upsetting. And so I had lunch with Christine. She said, well, I showed her my proof sources and all of that. And she said, well, you got to print what you feel is, you've got evidence for. And the following week after we had lunch, she went into city archives and old not abandoned, but city-owned buildings and dusty file cabinets and everything. And she ended up sending me about 15 more PDF files of letters between the city and Durand, about the eviction of the people down there and all that. So really a kind of a very, very sad state of affairs. But that's where Lamberton, I think part of the reason why Lamberton wanted to build a zoo there was because the Seneca Park Zoo was not built on Lamberton's watch. And I think he wanted a zoo, to his credit, as he was president of the Park Commission. So Durand does battle as best as he can, but he knows he's got to get back to Mexico. So he returns in 1916. He meets his wife, Harriet Durand, and she has a daughter by the name of Margaret. So they get married. There's a huge festive event there and everything because he's, got a new wife. He was in incredibly poor health at one point, and he had recovered from that. He has a new daughter, Margaret, now. But right around that time, the Mexican Revolution starts breaking out. And he knows that he's got to get his new family out of Mexico. It's extremely dangerous. So they travel nights only with his spouse and his new daughter. And it takes them 3 months of travel to reach the Southern California border. So after that, he briefly comes back to Rochester a number of times to visit, and he's still got this whole issue going on with the city that's taken over his land, and he's trying to get that resolved. And Margaret decides she wants to study voice, and so they head off to Europe so she can study voice in Venice and Paris and things like that. They actually lived here in Rochester for a while. And Durand tried to have George Eastman arrange to have her perform and stay here in Rochester and sing with the orchestra and operas and things like that. But whenever Eastman is heading that direction, either because he's going to Europe or because he's heading down to Africa for a safari or something like that, he always visits George Eastman in Paris where he's living. So they weren't the tightest of friends. I don't know that George Eastman had a tightest friend. He never married. He had a platonic relationship with a woman, but I don't know that because of his travel and he was so dedicated business-wise, I don't know that he had a closest friend. I could stand corrected on that, but every time they were good friends. But every time he visited Europe or had the opportunity, he would stop in Europe and visit Henry Durand. So this is the letter that I had mentioned. This is from 1922. And this is a 5-page letter. This is the actual copy of it. I've got the first page in the book, but I've typed out all 5 pages so people could read it. The first page is just a verification that I can type, essentially. And so the 4th page or the 5th page of this, it was actually a 5-page letter with that map that I showed you that showed Henry Durand's 20 acres of land for lifetime personal use. And so this letter contains the whole history in great detail of his acquisition of the properties with Durand, his trip to Mexico. And he says, by the way, I own other property in Irondequoit, which I was planning to give to the city of Rochester, like the Sara Lee farm. And he includes an invoice, right, with a letter charging the city for the barn they tore down, for his apple orchard, and a monthly rent for the land they were using for the zoo they had already begun building in 1911. But this is the interesting point here, is that 10-acre Sara Lee farm that I pointed out on the map, essentially, it's kind of a veiled threat. He doesn't say anything much more than this, other than the fact that you'll get that Sara Lee property over my dead body. And that's the way he really leaves it in his letter to Clarence Van Zandt. So Durand ends up dying in Paris of myocarditis in 1929. He's buried in Mount Hope Cemetery here, along with the rest of his family, his wife, his brothers, his mother, his father, his youngest daughter, his youngest sister, Mary, ended up marrying Dr. Edward Mulligan, who was George Eastman's personal physician. So there were definitely some links between the two. They traveled in the same social circles. They both belonged to the Genesee Valley Club. They both belonged to the Country Club of Rochester. They both belonged to the Rochester Yacht Club. But there was 7 years difference between the two of them. So where and how they first met is speculation. I really don't know. But the fact that they traveled in the same social circles, they knew each other, and then with Dr. Mulligan marrying Durand's youngest sister, Mary, it just drew the two of them much closer together. George Eastman wasn't married, so when he held events at his house, it was Mary who would act as the hostess for those types of events. So he dies in Paris in 1929, and George Eastman dies in 1932. Most Rochesterians probably know he was awfully depressed when Maria Kilbourne died. He was terribly depressed. And as he grew older, not only did that depression stick with him, but he also had tremendous back pain. So he had a hard time getting around. He was entertaining one evening at the mansion on East Avenue, and he told people there he had to go upstairs and write a memo. Goodbye, good night. He went upstairs and wrote a memo to my friends. My work here is over. Why wait? And he shot himself in the heart with an automatic pistol. This was the headline in the DNC the next morning. George Eastman mourned. That doesn't appear in the book because they wanted a ridiculous sum of money for me to show that. Yeah, it's like, hey, this is just a book about local history. So this is another really odd thing. So here's the plot. There's actually 3 plots at Mount Hope Cemetery, but this is one of the 3 Durand plots. This is where Henry's buried, Harriet here, his mother and father here, his brother John would essentially be over here. And then about 20 feet away is where Dr. Mulligan and his younger sister Mary are buried along with their children and everything. So they're all in the same area there, open to the public, as you know. And oddly enough, this is where George Eastman is buried. I'm sure some of you have probably been there, but it's such a shock. This is not where he wanted to be buried. He wanted to be buried with his mother, who was buried in Waterville with his father. And he lived such a close life and had such a close relationship with his mother, and the depression he went into on her death and everything. He wanted to be buried there in Waterville, New York, with his mother, but was overruled by his niece. Through city officials and people running Eastman Kodak at that time said no, his first love was really Eastman Kodak. It was the business, and so he really should be buried here in Rochester. And so his ashes are right here. And it's a very beautiful setting, but it's, a lot of people that I've spoken to, know where Eastman Park is, or not Eastman Park, but Kodak Park, but I've talked to very few people that have actually, wandered around there. But it's lovely, but it's not where George Eastman wanted to be buried. So this is kind of starts wrapping things up here. Harriet writes a letter after Durand's death. His body sent back from Paris where he dies, sent back, he's buried, and she writes a letter to the then city manager, Stephen Story is his name. And it says, surely before Durand's death, Harriet and Henry Durand had this conversation about, well, what are we going to do with the land that we still own, contiguous to the park? And it was surely decided that they were going to actually still donate it to the city of Rochester. So it was literally a decision, over his dead body. She sent this letter and she said, we're going to give the Sara Lee property and some other property to the city of Rochester as an addition to Durand Eastman Park. But the gift is conditional, that I may be permitted at some convenient future date to erect a suitable memorial gateway at the east entrance to the park. That's right off of Culver Road by the Parkside Diner right there. Erect a memorial gateway at the eastern entrance of the park in memory of Dr. Henry Durand, and to place 2 bronze plaques affixed to boulders and inscribed with a brief history of the origin of the park. Well, the city was happy to take that 10 acres of land. They never did this. Yeah. there again, I was just crushed as this research was coming out. And, here's the actual letter that she wrote. It's in a file on Durand Eastman Park at the Rundell Memorial Library.
Probably took that to mean that she was gonna do it. It says
Well,
I may.
Yes, I know, right.
I'm sure that's.
She was-
Paul.
Yeah. Well, whether or not that someone in the city of Rochester forgot, or they didn't want to do it, or they thought she was 54 years old at the time she wrote this letter. Maybe they thought she was going to go out and source some boulders and, do the 2 bronze blacks things and everything, but that's kind of a stretch. So this is the closest thing that Harriet receives to an apology letter. The word apology doesn't appear anywhere in this 1931 letter from Stephen Story here, but he thanks Harriet for the Sara Lee farm. He says, I know how deeply he, meaning Henry, was at the attitude of former city officials who felt disposed to ride roughshod over his wishes with regards to the development of the park. And he concludes here, the people of Rochester are exceedingly grateful for this gift. But I've been throughout the park. I've spoken with at least 3 or 4 or 5 past supervisors of Durand Eastman Park. Nobody is aware of these boulders or the bronze plaques ever existing. So this last August of last year, the city of Rochester actually owns Durand Eastman Park. It's not owned by the county park. The land is actually owned by the city of Rochester. So I had a meeting with the people in environmental services there because they had a presentation at Camp Eastman last August in which they talked about rebuilding the bathhouse down on Lake Ontario. There was one formerly, as you'll see in the next couple of slides. But I met with the people in environmental services and said, listen, I'm about to publish this book about Durand Eastman Park, and wow, does the city ever look kind of bad in this thing? So there's nothing the city can do at this point about that 20 acres of land that you built the zoo on, even though the zoo is no longer there. But I said, this really does not put Rochester, New York, my hometown and their hometown, in a favorable light. I said, but there is something that you could do, and that's this. Put on, on the 2 bronze plaques on boulders and place them where Harriet Durand wanted them. So fortunately, I met with one of the finance people there at the city of Rochester, and they have verbally committed to do that now. I wrote up the text about a couple months ago and submitted it to them. They've got other priorities going on there right now, which I understand, but I'm hoping sometime here in 2025 that there will be a ribbon cutting ceremony of sorts right by the flowering tree collection, which is when you first drive into the park. The Parkside Diner is over to your right, and the flowering tree collection is right there, and that's where those boulders with the plaques belong until such time, I think, that if they do manage to build the new bathhouse, which may not be completed if they get the funding for it until 2028 to 2030, then I would propose that they move them from there and put them right in front of the new bathhouse, which is going to be a phenomenal structure itself. Yeah. So the 6 pillars of the park. Well, what are they? The Arboretum. An arboretum is just a living tree museum. Durand Eastman Park had one of the 3 best arboretums in the whole country. Highland was one of them, Durand Eastman Park, and the Arnold Arboretum, which is run by Harvard over in the Boston area. But part of the reason that it's such a unique place is because, and I would highly encourage you to take there's a Cornell Cooperative Extension, a number of walks and tours of the Durand Eastman Arboretum coming up here in the weeks ahead. So I'd highly encourage you to see it. But because of the way that the hills and the geography of the area there are hills that kind of come down towards the lake, 3 or 4 of them, and they're actually called hogbacks. They're different from eskers as we know them, for example, out in Mendon Ponds Park, but they're hogbacks, and they were essentially formed by the erosional process as Lake Ontario, which used to go up the Ridge Road, began to move back and withdraw back to where its current shoreline is. But because of those, you have these microclimates throughout the park, and that allows for species, some species from all around the globe to be planted here. So some incredible variety of trees there. And each of the trees, almost every tree is banded with its genus and species, which is really very nice also. So I would highly recommend check out the Cornell Cooperative Extension Tour that will be coming up. Then the beach house itself, as I said, they presented this this last August, 3 different concepts for a new beach house. This is one of them that I particularly like. This would be Lakeshore Boulevard. The lake would be out in front here. And this is one of 3 designs. There's various phases. There's 3 different phases that the city's environmental services group is going to have to go through before they actually build a new beach house. They're in phase 1 right now. So if anyone travels up Lakeshore Boulevard there, you'll notice that there's areas that are fenced off. There's some heavy, earth moving equipment in there and everything. This is phase 1. They're building stairs from all of that parking area along Lakeshore Boulevard. The areas that we used to watch the submarine races from. Yeah, okay. So they're building stairs now down to the beach from those parking lots. So that's phase 1, and that's in progress right now. Phase 2 will be to raise additional funding so that they can build this, and then they'll set up a plan for moving, the utilities that will need to be moved, and really plan for how they would go about physically building a new beach house there. And then phase 3 obviously is building the beach house itself. But again, that may not happen. It's subject to funding and grants and all sorts of things. The zoo was begun right after Durand left, just about in 1911. This is one photograph, a black and white Albert Stone photograph. The zoo stood until I think it was 1962. The refectory, this is all that you see now. The White Lady Ghost sign is out in front, and that wall you see there. In one of the earlier slides, you could see the building that, the refectory that used to stand above it. And a lot of people think that that's where the White Lady lived. Well, she didn't. That was a communal restaurant that was up there. But this wall still exists, and it's in slight need of repair, but it's still there. And then you have a Donald Ross golf course. Donald Ross built 6.5 golf courses here in Rochester. Durand Eastman was the half, because he when he went down there, he saw how wet and marshy some areas were, that he thought that it could only accommodate 9 holes. So he built a 9-hole course there, which was built between 1916 and the early 1920s. And then about a decade later, Robert Trent Jones, another famous golf course architect who happened to live in East Rochester, which I never knew. He's got golf courses all around the world, but he's the one who was responsible for expanding the golf course from 9 holes to 18 holes, which it is today. And then the 6th pillar of the park here really are the trails and shelters that still exist there for everybody's enjoyment. And then as I was writing the book, I thought, geez, I kind of vaguely remember there used to be a soapbox derby up there.
There is.
Yeah, so I had to do a little digging, and I came across the name of this guy, Mark Scalderi. And so I Googled him and everything, and managed to send him an email or leave a message for him or something. And I said, hey, Mark, I'm writing this book about Durand Eastman Park, and I'd like to have a paragraph about the soapbox derby. He said, paragraph? You need a chapter. You need a chapter on the soapbox derby. So I said, okay, tell you what, you write the chapter and I'll edit it. And so that's essentially what we ended up doing. Several weeks later, I had 3 or 4 pages all about the soapbox derby, and cute little story, a cute story and humorous story in there about how we managed to bring the soapbox derby back to Rochester. So I have Mark Scalderi to thank for that. So back in Durand's time, he would have been very proud, in spite of how deeply hurt he was by the city's taking over his 20 acres of land. I think he would have been very proud of the way that Durand Eastman Park was really a world-class park in the 1920s and early 30s. It had all of those. It had a beach house. It had this refectory. It had an arboretum that was one of the top three. It had a Robert Trent Jones and Donald Ross golf course. So it was really a phenomenal public park. But in time since then, unfortunately, the arboretum has gotten overgrown. There are beautiful species, like this is a Japanese snowball viburnum. That is, I don't even know if you'll be able to see it this year. It's just getting so overgrown with other weed trees and vines and things like that. It's a real shame. The zoo's gone, the beach house is gone, the refectory is gone, other than the stone wall that's there. And so the city has tried to do the best they can with budget cuts and staff cuts, and really the lack of expertise that you would need to drive, a project to really revitalize this. I think the Cornell Cooperative guys could probably do that. And I think they probably, if they, put together some sort of concept and presented it to the city, I think they probably could begin a lengthy process, but I'm not sure how it would be funded. I think you could find the staff to help restore some of the incredible arboretum. So this is the original beach house. As you can see, it was very Romanesque in its appearance with urns and columns, and it was quite a large structure. These are what were presented last August as the new beach house concepts. This one looks kind of like the old one. This one is called the Canopy. And this one, I think they refer to as the Hill or something like that. So I don't know if they've opened these designs up for public comment yet. They may wait to do that until they know that it's more imminent and they have funding in place for it. But it's good to see that the city is trying to help Durand Eastman Park make a comeback of sorts. And then this is the former Durand Eastman, or the zoo. Yeah, so if you go up Zoo Road, as it exists now, it's a one-way. You can only go from the lake south. But there's a maintenance building, I think, somewhere up in this area. And then they built essentially these pens down into a gully here for the hoofed animals. And there are a lot of Albert Stone photographs. This one I just love because I, for the life of me, cannot figure out how that guy gets up there. I mean, all right, it's a goat, but still, all right. Even if I had ropes and clamps, I don't think I could make it up there. And how does he get down? But I don't know. Somehow they do. Those are him.
He just jumps from pillar to pillar.
Yeah, I know, but you think how big that is. He's got to weigh as much as all of us do, and the land balanced on piece of cake. So those are Himalayan mountain goats, and as I said,
They could do it.
Alexander Lamberton bought all of these animals out of his own pocket. So he was determined. So, well, I'm sorry, all the updates I had done to this presentation 3 times last night, none of them stuck. So I have upcoming presentations at the Webster Library, Rundell Library in June. And then I already did one at the Irondequoit Library, but it had like over 100 people. They filled 3 rooms, because it's really
It's Irondequoit,
it's Irondequoit. Yeah, I mean, you're a quarter of a mile away from the park. So that wasn't exactly a big surprise. And then almost at the close, the birdhouse was up on top here, but the book's available. The Durand Eastman Park book is available in a number of different spots. It's interesting. Irondequoit does not have a bookstore. If anybody's looking for something to do, you could open a bookstore in Irondequoit and you'd have the first one. But so I had to kind of get creative and so I have this book is here. Thank you, Liz. And it's some of the Barnes and Nobles carry both books. Some of them, like the Webster store, only carries the Durand Eastman Park book. And you've got all these other venues, but I'll tell a short story here and then we'll wrap it up and answer any questions you have. But the Titus Tavern here, I had to go out to places like Ted's Barber Shop and the food store down there on Pattonwood Drive by the bridge and places like that, Irondequoit Brewing, to find places to sell the books since there's no bookstore. So the guy that owns Titus Tavern said, "Yeah, sure, come on in and we'll bring some books with you, and we'll sell them here." Right? He says, "I don't know how many we'll go through, but bring them in." So I went there on a Friday evening to drop off the books to John, and I can bring these books in, but the place is packed to the gills. I mean, just absolutely shoulder to shoulder like this, crowded. And it turns out that on that Friday night, they were having a surprise birthday party for one of the bartenders who had worked there forever. So that was all very nice, but everybody who had ever been to the Titus Tavern was there. So I was like, wow, I'm here to deliver these, just 5 books there. And there was one seat at the bar. So I went over and I said, the guy on the left, "Is anybody sitting here?" And he said, no, go ahead. And I went to the guy on the right of it. "Anybody sitting here?" No, it's fine. It's open. Sit down. So I sit down. John Giel comes over from behind the bar. "Hey, John, I'll have a beer. And, here are your books and everything." And this guy over here goes, "What was that all about?" I said, "Well, I just finished writing a book about Durand Eastman Park." He goes, "Oh, that's a fantastic park." He says, "That's just down the road from my house." I said, "Oh, where do you live?" He said, "Well, I live off of Pine Grove Avenue." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Wow, that's amazing." I said, "I grew up off of Pine Grove Avenue at 43 Poppy Street." He said, "That's my house." True story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Small world, small neighborhood, all that stuff. So I'll close up with another Jim Montana's photograph. This is kind of, there's a lot of photographs of the park that I could post, but you wouldn't really know if it was Durand Eastman or Men Ponds or something else. But this one's very distinctive because of the Seaway Trail that cuts right across just before you get to the lake as you come down Sweet Fern. So a beautiful photograph of Jim's in the fall. Another photograph of John's from the air of Lake Ontario. And then another photograph of David's. That's a cedar waxwing.
Yep.
And then this is a later one. It's not in the book, but another one that David just took.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, which I think is, yeah, I know, look at that. Yeah, an American bald eagle down there fishing. So that's it.
Thank you.
Any questions I can answer for anybody? Yes, Mary Jane.
List posted of where you are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Where can we check on the list of where you're presenting?
Well, the easiest thing right now, I have presentations at a number of old folks' homes where I'll be attending one of these days.
Sure.
But the Webster Library is the next one, and then the Rundell, and then the Irondequoit Library. On the bottom of page 2, is my email address. So if you want to just send me an email, I can give you any updates on where and when and what times and dates and everything that other presentations are going to be taking place. Mary Jane, did you have a question?
I sure do. Where did George Eastman's mother live? Where did George grow up?
Well, he grew up in Waterville, right? But they ended up moving here to Rochester by the time Eastman was 14 years old, because he actually worked in accounting, I think it was like Rochester Savings Bank or something like that. And wherever he lived, he always had a place for his mother nearby. They lived on Arnold Park, or she did at one point. And she may have still been living there when he built the mansion on East Avenue. But they had at least 2 or 3 different homes, I think, in the interim between moving from Waterville to Rochester.
Like your dad built the mansion? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure it's in the book, but yeah, I would guess maybe in the 40s or 50s.
With the mansion?
Yeah.
No, he died. No, he died.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, he died in 30. So it must have been in there, yeah, in the 20s, I guess. Yeah, good point. Yes.
How do you find out about the Arboretum walks?
I would just Google Cornell Cooperative Extension, Durand Eastman Park. Yeah, I just got a notice of.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I just got a notice of it last week, I think, or something. And I did it last fall, but I want to do it again because it was kind of a short tour the time I went, and I want to kind of get the full thing.
Okay.